Title 9, more like Title Wine. Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Scott, and this is Church is Lame, the podcast where we try to fix the church by talking about stupid things churches and church leaders do that break the entire body. Mark, that's a pretty interesting title there. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I kind of want to not start with this one, but I feel like I have to if I'm like calling that the title, right? Like I really need to start there. So Answers in Genesis decided that
No,
yeah,
no,
I know.
no,
I said the magic words.
You're killing me. Okay.
Oh yeah.
I'm here for it.
Oh
okay.
yeah. So yeah, and of course, they accuse somebody of being anti-science, which is just fantastic.
Yes.
Answers in Genesis is accusing somebody else of being anti-science. That's
Do what?
oh my, it hurts the soul. So the U.S. Department of Education passed amendment to Title IX saying gender identity cannot be discriminated against in schools. Okay, this is a pretty straightforward thing. It's been happening everywhere. Of course, Answers in Genesis, like everybody else in their ilk, is freaking out that well, now, that means, your daughter could have a man for a roommate in college.
Right.
And, oh gosh, and they say, this is insanity. It's evil. And it's largely women who will suffer under this anti-science, anti-biblical new policy if it goes through.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest question I kind of start off with is, why is it primarily women who are going to suffer?
Right.
Because it's just as likely that your son could have a woman as a roommate. I mean, like, what? Like, why is it worse for a woman to have a man roommate and a man to have a woman roommate?
Right.
Like, I'm not even sure what their logic is in the first place.
Yes. It's like we went through decades of feminism just to erase it all in one fell swoop.
Yeah. And of course, like, this is people who identify as that gender.
Right.
So you'd have, if you had, just like a cis woman in a dorm room and she had a trans woman as a roommate. I mean, they both identify as women.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure why it's like, if you're the person that Answers in Genesis wants to call a man sees themselves as a woman. I mean, what's like the difference there? Because like really that has nothing to do with their sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And just as like a general statistic, matter of fact kind of a thing, there are a lot more gay people than there are trans people. So the chances of your child going to school and having a gay roommate of the same gender is way more significant than them having a trans roommate. So like, it just seems like unreflective and I can't say hypocritical, just stupid.
Knee jerk. It's a very knee jerk reaction.
That's a better way of saying it.
Which the church never does. Everything the church does is always slow, methodical, well considered, and highly evolved thinking.
Yeah, I know you could not say it. Yeah,
couldn't even get through that. Right. So yeah, this is what happens. Everything, the church, and especially the America, red, white, and blue. Man's man and women should be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Like the whole, we've just come up in the last decade, we've just come up with words to start describing gender identity we've just barely scratched the surface of the conversation and the church already just wants to shut it down. We're in the infancy of considering, what it means to make policies about being transgendered. Even like really we're in the beginning stages of really doing more than lip service to the LGBT community in general, right? And so are there going to be growing pains in this process?
Oh, totally, for sure. Yeah.
Right? Of course there are, right? But Title IX is about not discriminating to the detriment of a minority class that is still emerging, right? So making sure that they have the same access to clubs and sports and all of the different academic and non-academic activities schools might be able to provide to a student, right? And making sure that those students aren't denied access to those activities and programs solely because of their gender identity, right?
Right.
And so now, like, everybody who lives in constant fear of a changing world, now their brain goes into fast forward, and what does it mean for the kid in my dorm? It's like we're not there yet, you know?
Yeah.
So like,
And the thing that really bugs me about this is just like not this specific article, but like this phenomenon is that we've seen a lot of this type of article pop up in our news feeds.
Sure.
And it is almost always somebody complaining about a man, quote unquote, what they mean is a trans woman,
yeah,
being in the presence of cis women,
right.
which is completely bizarre to me that is the concern. Like there's this, like
Yeah.
it kind of betrays just the horrible patriarchy of evangelical churches, that they are so concerned about trans women. They're like, it kind of like goes back to this ancient, I mean, maybe not ancient enough, idea, like, and like Martin Luther, himself, even like called, women like a lesser version of a man. Like this idea of like a woman is a malformed man, which,
Mhm.
Scientifically we know is, really not at all true. It's like we all start
Yeah.
off female in the womb, before
Right.
there is gender differentiation.
Yeah.
So it's just like this bizarre patriarchal regressive view of women as less than,
Yeah.
and they cannot get over this whole idea, and to call like this policy anti-science. It's
Yeah.
like, well, this is where the science is going, is that, gender is a descriptive function, not a prescriptive function.
Right. Like it's not even I totally agree with you, and I hadn't even thought about it until you brought it up about how this is incredibly patriarchal.
Mhm.
And it didn't even occur to me to think about like this whole, men being superior to women kind of thing. Like I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's really, now that I think about it, it might be like the most important part of this conversation,
Yeah, I mean, there's also like the aspect of purity culture that
Mhm.
may very well be part of what is the problem here.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like you want to like you look at trans women as being, bad because they're no longer men, and then you want to do nothing but you hyper protect women. It's like you're trying to protect the purity of your daughters.
Yeah.
From what? I'm not entirely sure. And if it's like,
Right.
if the argument's going to be like, well, I don't want, my daughter to see a penis or whatever. It's like, well, bad news for you. She probably already has.
Yeah.
But more than that, most people that go to college don't really want to see their roommates naked regardless.
Right. It's interesting, like that you bring up the idea of like this whole anti-science piece of it,
Mhm.
and then the purity piece of it. It's like we're anti-science, we're anti-sex, and we're even to the point where it's like we're anti-facts,
Mhm.
right? So like in my mind, like this really started getting a real wave behind it with the headlines about the swimmer, Leah Thomas.
Oh yeah. I'm not going to lie. I haven't actually read those articles, even though I saw them.
Okay. Anyway, same thing, right? Like, there's no facts behind the concern. All there is a trans woman who is now competing in women's swimming competitions, right?
Mhm.
And everybody goes stark raving mad. Unfair advantage, unfair advantage, unfair advantage. But when you actually look at the facts, her times are not the best times in women's swimming. She is not a record breaker. She's not even coming close to women's records,
Mhm.
right? She's just a good swimmer, a great swimmer in the women's field. But like if we're going to like really like make something of this, like wouldn't she have to break a record or two in the process to kind of go, "Wow, this is super unfair." And nothing like this should ever be allowed. Like, shouldn't there be some sort of demonstrable statistics that she's just creaming everybody?
Yeah. I mean, that would seem to be like the logical thing. And it's weird to me that like that sports is a hill that some Christians are willing to die on.
Yeah.
I mean, like, sports are not like that important just in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And if you're into sports, I'm not trying to say you're a bad human being. I'm just saying, whether or not we fed the hungry is more important than whether or not the Bears won their last game that they played. That's just life. But it's funny how like women's sports are like, they are, paid way less than men's sports. If it's, college sports, they're funded way less than the male sports are. So women's sports are only an issue when it's a trans woman. Like all the other problems with women's sports, they don't matter. It only matters when there's, somebody with too much testosterone going in. And I think that there is like actually some rules about that already, like rolled up in a lot of competitive sports. So that women don't take testosterone supplements to give themselves an unfair edge.
Right.
So like if your testosterone levels are too high, you will be disqualified from, participating as a person who has transitioned. I mean, ideally you should be, your hormones should have been sorted out by that point. Right. But it's like, I feel like maybe we're getting a little bit too far afield.
You are, but like just the one thing I just want to say about that is it's funny though when you turn around, you ask men about steroids, and they say, and they'll just shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But in women's sports, it's like a make or break. But yeah, to bring it back around, Title IX. So I'm not super versed in civil rights. Okay, this is not what this podcast doesn't exist to go into the minutia of civil rights. In general, I will say that I think Title IX is good, right? The government should come down and say, wherever there are opportunities to discriminate, you should all stop it, right? But when it comes to actual schools implementing and changing and morphing into meeting the needs of the modern student, I think it should be done slowly, methodically, well considered, right? And of course, that's going to frustrate the LGBTQ and the trans community. That change happens slowly. But in general, I think slow change is much preferable than change that knocks your cause back 5 decades,
Yeah, I mean, I think a measured movement forward is good. And, that language of like, incrementalism can get real dicey real fast. So, I don't like to use that kind of language, but I'm pretty sure that like, any kind of school that would be progressive enough to put trans and cis students together would have the foresight and the wherewithal to do things like, hey, when you fill out your application, for housing, check this box, are you okay with having a trans roommate?
Right.
Like it's a pretty simple solution there. And I think
except one of the first things that's going to go to court is it okay for a college to ask a student if they're trans?
Yeah, you know what? And I'll be here to talk about that when that happens, I guess.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see what that happens. Or do the hospitals just get the right to access birth records and go right to the source and say, well, what does your birth certificate say you are? Yeah, and I think just like this evangelical overreaction, this sort of a thing. It's like the probability of encountering a trans student in housing is, not super high. We're talking, depending on where you get the numbers. I mean, it can be, like 1.5%, is kind of around where I see most of those kinds of statistics. And so like, yeah, you'll have it, but it's like for only one in a few of these people is going to happen. And, like that's not that big of a deal. Like to make it like a centralized issue, which some people have, is just absurd. But I think more than that, it's, those protections. So, when you have a society that has a really big problem with treating women equally to men, to give a trans woman the same protections as a cis woman, I think is an important step in loving our neighbor as ourself. Yeah. To make sure that you cannot be abused, like anybody else should not be abused. I mean, I think as a mode of Christian love, we need to provide those protections. And I mean, as for like, students being in a room with a roommate situation, I mean, like
if you aren't cool with it, then, you know, you're not cool with it. But like, let the students make up their own minds what they want to deal with.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail around the head. There's nothing I want to add to that.
Right on. I was afraid I was being too Pollyannish about that.
Well, you are, because like, yeah, well, yeah. No, we'll bring it up later. So let's go from one weird school story to another weird school story.
Well, I've got another weird school story then.
Okay.
So like that's the thing here. It's just all over the place. So I've got from Christian Headlines. So 18 former students file a criminal abuse complaint against the Canadian Christian Academy, which was called Legacy Christian Academy now. And this is just wonderful. This is too great. So 18 former students of a Canadian Christian Academy have filed criminal abuse complaints against the Academy, saying that they were forced to take part in exorcisms and were physically punished at the school. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'd like to add that in another case, that a couple of students were seeking damages of $25 million, which would be punitive damages. And
of course,
and this is the Canadian court system, so keep that in mind. You know, like there's things can operate differently there. But these two students said, you know, the staff tried to physically and psychologically break me. Despite their best efforts, they were not successful. That is why I'm able to stand here today. You know, this person said this in court.
Yeah.
That's the situation. And like they were suing specifically for not just physical abuse, but sexual abuse on top of it. So like this school,
of course, is
just a magical grab bag of all the stuff you're not supposed to do as Christians.
Real quick question. Legacy Christian Academy, college, K through 12, what, high school, what is it? Do we know?
This is college level. And
college level. Got it. Okay.
So two of the students were college level. I think there were others. You know, I'm a bad monkey.
College is all I need to know. Yeah, this is just a grab bag of awful leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because like this is like they were talking about this in the one article. Because the one article I had was very, very thin on details. The other one was a lot more intensive. But like they were talking about, you know, being in there for like pastoral training,
right,
and being abused, like physically abused, and psychologically abused in the realm of pastoral training. I'm sorry, but like it's a pretty well understood phenomenon that when somebody goes through an abusive situation, that they can in turn become the abuser. So I'm not like really sure what these you know jackwads are trying to accomplish at this school.
Yeah. So like as long as we're talking about this, let's wrap in the other story we have this week as well, which is about the Foursquare denomination. So they also have some controversy stewing around them. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, all that kind of stuff happening as well. So what happens in these Christian colleges is that they are typically feeder systems for denominations or churches, right?
Right, yeah.
And so what you're getting, it's a combination of academic rigor, but more than that, it's a cultural training. How to fit into the culture of the denomination, how to fit into the system. Just like a minor league baseball team feeds into a major league baseball team, you learn their system, you know, how they think about pitching, how they think about hitting and batting, and how their defense works, all that kind of stuff. It's no different here at these colleges. And by the way, when you think college, you should not be thinking like Penn State or Notre Dame. Like you should be thinking like a single building, you know, with like 100 students or 200 students, right? Just to make sure we understand that there's a difference, okay?
Yeah, because that's what a lot of these schools are. I mean, because like I went to Wheaton College, which is, I mean, tiny when you compare it to something like, you know, Princeton,
Notre Dame.
You know, it's like it's a really tiny campus,
right? But you want to talk about like grooming and indoctrination. That's all these small Christian colleges that are feeders into denominations. That's really the main point of it, you know. Is like, oh man, like we need to make sure that you know, all the people who are gonna, you know, be troublemakers and actually like speak up for the truth and speak up for not being abused and not putting up with the sexual advances of men, we need to make sure to weed them all out, you know?
Yeah, they have this kind of reputation as being kind of like brainwashing facilities.
Yes, absolutely.
And like, I don't have that much experience. Like I said, I went to Wheaton College, so that's my experience. And like, they were not a brainwashing factory, but they weren't like a specific denomination.
Right.
But, you know, and like, I've never heard anything, you know, specifically bad about, you know, Wheaton College, unless you're LGBT.
Sure.
So, you know, thematic appropriation, you know, but like these like really hardline denominational places, when I say hardline, I'm not like judging them. I'm saying like they are like, you know, focused on just this one denomination, like how, like it might even be a small denomination, you know, or it might be, so like, this could be like, you know, like Foursquare, it is called a denomination. So like whatever their deal is, like that's how focused this school is.
Yeah. And the tragedy about the Foursquare thing in particular is not, I mean, the tragedy, yes, is that abuse happened, but the abuse got reported and investigation teams were created and accountability teams were created and counseling teams were created. And all of this activity happened for nothing. At the end of the day, the accountability teams got disbanded. The counseling teams got disbanded. All the promises for transparency and explanations evaporated, instead with notifications of, hey, if you have any questions, feel free to email us, kind of thing.
Oh yeah. And like, yeah, there was like numerous complaints, people trying to get the results of these reports, and just like people like, what report, you know?
Yeah, exactly right. You know, like, oh, you know, the pastor who abused all these people, you know, in return for sexual favors and stuff, I can get you your dream job at the church of your choice, kind of thing. Or if I don't like you, or if I think you're a threat, or if I think you're more handsome than me, I will make sure you never get a job working in one of our churches, you know?
And there's a quote from the article I want to read here, because it's very interesting to me. So it says, the Pentecostal denomination has a quote unquote culture where there is unchecked power ripe for misconduct.
Yeah.
You know, it says, and there is a charismatic theology of inspired leadership that can work against accountability and oversight. And I think right there, if your theology allows you to hide things like abuse and misconduct, your theology is bad.
It sucks. Yeah, your theology sucks if this is where it gets you. Yeah.
Just as a basic principle of the Christian faith, our theology cannot give hiding place for the things of the devil.
That's right. I think there's no clearer way to say it than just that. That is the perfect way to summarize kind of like the million ways this went wrong, right? And I think like in terms of like how does this break the church, like that perfectly sums it up. You know, the theology should have nowhere for this kind of stuff to hide.
Right. And I think the worst part of this whole story, like it kind of culminated for me in this statement, and it was saying that the denomination finally moved to investigate Larkin, who was the president, who was accused of all this stuff. When Heidi Cooper, a Foursquare minister, told the vice president of the denomination that she would no longer serve as an occasional guest speaker at Ignite, which is one of their events. She explained that Larkin had said sexually inappropriate things to her. Like, that's what finally broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Like that, like all this other stuff that happened that people made go away. Like it just took this one more person to be like, no, I'm not speaking at your event. Being like, this is an important event for them. It's like, I get it. But it shouldn't have taken, that event shouldn't have been the thing that was most important to you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's just yet another example of people who claim to be part of the body of Christ, who instead want to do the worst things in the shadows. Unfortunately, just unbelievable.
Yeah, and just kind of wrapping this back around to the first article we talked about, because these second two really did fit into each other like two puzzle pieces. This obsession, I mean, I shouldn't say obsession. I'm being deliberately unfair by saying that, so I don't want to say that.
Yeah.
So there's a very strong concern in evangelical circles about, their children getting a good education and a good environment. This is not absurd to anybody. Like every parent wants their kid to get a good education in an environment that's positive and uplifting. But for all the complaints that evangelicals will often level against public schools, especially colleges, we see just as bad stuff happening in our churches and in our Christian schools.
Right.
So, it's like that whole, if you point at me, you have three fingers pointing back at you and a thumb going off there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's what it seems that this situation is.
Right. I mean, don't talk about the splinter in my eye until you're ready to deal with this plank in yours, right?
Yeah. So then my question then is, why is this a particular concern for Christians? Like you're a parent, you have kids, your kids are getting older, like they're going to be going to college one day. As a parent, what is your biggest concern for them when they're in college? Why would you want to send them to one kind of college versus another? Like, what's your take on it? Because I don't have kids, so I don't feel quite comfortable kind of.
Oh, yeah. I'm the wrong person to ask because it's not important to me that my kids go to college, let alone go to a certain kind of college. Far more important to me is my kids knowing at that point in their life, knowing that they have the tools they need to be happy, productive members of society, and that's the so but if we were to kind of go down this hypothetical,
I think you kind of said it right there, is that you want your kids to have the tools that they need.
Yeah.
And I feel like evangelical kids very often go to college and then just kind of ditch out on the church. I feel like that's what these parents want too. I think, if I'm guessing that they want their kids to have the tools to do that, but they're not making sure the kids have those tools before they go off to college.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there's something in a parent's mindset of these students that puts a premium on, I want them to have my biblical worldview.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't happen. Right. Every generation, in some way, shape, or form, will find a way to rebel against their parents. Right. So it's a concept that's doomed to failure. Like that, I want an entire generation of students to have their parents' biblical ideology, these schools here are like the shining examples of what happens when that gets misapplied, right? So like for some reason with these parents, it didn't throw up a red flag that this college that's supposed to be the super hip feeder college or the super hip denomination, can't get 500 students enrolled, Like that should be a red flag. Like, hey, how come your college is no bigger than like a little podunk high school in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah, that's, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to say like that needs to be the sign for you, because there's a lot more going on there, right? But I don't think you're off base either.
Right.
Because, they're like, I went to a college, that was a physically small one, right? So it didn't have a huge class, but it's still, it has rotated thousands and thousands and thousands of students out over the years, and it has a long history. It's well over 100 years old. So like there's a rich history here, whereas a lot of these are schools that were founded in, if you're lucky, the 1800s, but very often, like in, the 20th century. They're very new schools, and like they almost seem like they were made to be not made to be reaction. They were made because of a reactionary mindset.
Yeah. I think maybe we got like off the beaten path here, because ultimately I think where we were like, I don't know.
Well, I guess where I wanted to take that, is that, we send, we meaning Christians broadly, we send our kids to Christian schools because we want them to get a Christian education. We want them to think Christian thoughts. But I think when you said that, we want you to think the way we think. And I think that's the issue, is that they're not being taught how to rationally work through their faith. I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with Father Richard Rohr. I'm sure some of the people listening to this or watching this, they know who Father Richard Rohr is. So he's a Franciscan priest who is really, I don't want to call him hippy dippy, but kinda. But, he talked, and, in the podcast, I want to say it was like a podcast through his organization that he works with. Like he talks about, construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. And, the concept is that, when we're very young, we're taught like the rules to follow, to obey, the things to think and just spit out. We become older and then we enter this phase called deconstruction, where we start to question all these beliefs and these rules and try to figure out how they work. And then reconstruction is a process of putting it all back together into a coherent, cohesive whole. And I feel like there's not enough, like evangelical parents excel, especially the more conservative they get. They excel at construction with their children, but they don't prepare the children for deconstruction. And then when they get sent to schools where they are abused, where they are sexually harassed, like that is forcing them to deconstruct the faith, and not in the way you would want them to.
Right.
So like, to me, that's like where this is really breaking the church, is just like, is that, and I don't want to blame parents for not raising their kids right, but I think that there's like skill sets that evangelical parents can be better about making sure their children learn it, like critical thinking and learning, that there's more than one way to think about these things, because let's face it, but Pentecostals are really new in the realm of the church. So to say that you automatically have it all right when the Lutherans just have it all screwed up, it's weird.
Yeah, like this breaks the church in so many ways, and you're right. You're absolutely right. We do our kids a disservice when we throw them into these situations, and their first experience with independence ends up being trauma and abuse. It's like my heart goes out to every story of abuse that happened in these two articles, and my heart is infuriated with the quote unquote leadership that abused them this way, right, or lack thereof.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to send our children off to school, and a school that we believe will be a more uplifting and innocent place, only to have them hurled into the bowels of the beast. Yeah.
Once again, we're at that same place, like radical transparency, radical accountability. What's happening in these board of directors, what's happening in these executive boards, that they don't know what's going on in their own organization, that they are not protecting the kids under their stewardship, that they're not honoring the multitudes of thousands of dollars that parents are paying to send the kids there. Just like, what's happening? I don't know. Are these guys just so charismatic that nobody cares what awful things they do? I just don't understand.
I have many theories, and they are probably all wrong.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. Just really unbelievable.
But you know what? On the bright side, we don't have to talk about this any longer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So that was kind of a crazy round robin of crazy things happening in the educational system, huh?
Just a little bit.
Okay, but you know what else is crazy? Our audio podcast has hit 1,000 downloads.
That is awesome.
That is awesome. And I know, in the age of virality, 1,000 doesn't sound like much. But here's the thing. Like, we are not paying some sort of advertiser to advertise for us. We are not paying SEO specialists to go out there and, drum up some links and stuff. It's just two guys, behind microphones and cameras, putting out content twice a week that we hope finds an audience. And in podcasting, in the audio podcasting world, there is no magic bullet to virality, And so slow and steady wins the race, and 1,000 downloads is heck yeah,
Yeah, it's more downloads than I thought I would ever be involved with.
Yeah, so to our podcast audience in particular, listening in your car, on your iPhones, on your Android devices, maybe somebody out there has a Microsoft Zune still. I don't know, maybe.
I hope not.
The story of the Zune is funny because when it came out, a Microsoft executive showed it to an Apple executive and said, "This thing is so much better than any of your iPods." And the Apple executive was like, I have no doubt that it absolutely is better, And it just kind of goes to show that even if you have the better product, doesn't mean that you're ultimately going to win the race, but if you have one of those, man, we thank you for listening and downloading and staying apart and being part of that podcast community. That's really awesome, and thank you.
Yeah, like I guess I can't thank you enough from my point of view too, because just hey, we get to do this, and it's fun and it's enjoyable. Of course, it doesn't pay us anything, but hey, that's not the point.
Exactly. And like I said, we're just slow and steady wins the race, and you never know. I think before the end of the year, maybe we'll make a few pennies on this thing. You never know.
Yeah, maybe just enough to like have a website.
Right. Yeah.
Pay the editor actual money instead of dog treats.
Right. We have a new subscriber on YouTube, Adrian Leslie. We appreciate your subscription. I believe we just broke 160 words is hard. Subscribers. We just broke 160 subscribers. So that's super awesome as well. Once again, we don't put any more money into marketing for our YouTube channel than we do for the podcast. We do, however, have a ridiculously talented editor who doesn't actually put in a credit on the videos, which he should. Samuel Garrettson. So if you're watching, you should put like a little thing on the video saying, edited by. Feel free to do that.
Yeah.
So he is the one guy who actually makes a little money off this by editing our videos, and I'm happy to pay him because getting that time back to actually think about these stories and think about the channel and having the bigger dreams and not kind of sit there splicing video and wanting to throw my mouse at the screen is a wonderful thing. So I'm happy to get that time back for sure. So thank you, Samuel. You rock.
Yes, and plus, he possesses a skill we do not. And if anybody out there thinks that editing videos is straightforward and easy, I dare you.
Yeah. You've really got to love it, because otherwise you just want to like claw your eyes out.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we had a bunch of comments. Like, we have just been so blessed by the interactivity of our followers. There have been sometimes comments tend to coalesce, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of become very similar to one another. We had a lot of similar comments about Ted Haggard and that video. Well summed up by Craig Hawthorne. This is 6 days ago. I can't believe they ever allowed that guy back in the pulpit.
Yeah, that says it.
That really just says it all. And it's not just him, right? Mark Driscoll. I have no idea how Pat Robertson was able to go through an entire career without ever being asked to step down in the first place, but whatever. Yeah. But it's like, okay, so, you're kind of in the closet, but not in a way that anybody really believes you, and B, you can't seem to get a handle on a drug problem, so much so that you are stepped down in disgrace from your first church just to build yourself back up and be disgraced a second time for the exact same things. It seemed like, what's that phrase? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Yeah, it's like, what do people expect when you take broken people who refuse to deal honestly with the crap going on in their lives, and you just put them back in the same meat grinder again? I
don't know, because we have this long list of pastors and preachers who are just either just disgraceful on the basis of their ministry alone, or just have been disgraced on account of their sin. And, and none of these are complaints we can ever level against Mr. Rob Bell.
Oh, nice.
I thought you'd like it.
Yeah, I did. That was smooth.
I have nothing else to say. That was it. I blew all my brain juice on just that transition, so I'm not even sure where to go from there.
Yeah, what's funny, because I think a lot of people, especially those in the more militant forms of fundamental Christianity, I think they look in the mirror and are pretty proud of all the insults they've hurled at Rob Bell along the way. But it's good just to see him standing and still doing well for just being a consistent communicator that truth is love and that love is truth. And that a lot of the details that we get bogged down into have nothing to do with either truth or love,
Yeah, that'll preach.
I think so. So Rob Bell, if you ever get wind of this, you know where to find us.
Straight up. And with that, we thank Rob Bell for listening to us if he heard that message. But more than that, we thank you all for listening because you're there. And with that, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.